We are continuing our series in the book of Philippians. We were in, as you can tell, we're in 19 to 30. Let me give you a quick summary before I begin. This book is written by the author Paul. Paul, who is here reminding this church that he planted some 10 to 11 years prior, a church that he deeply loves. He loves this church, and he is reminding them that the central message of the Bible, which is what we call the gospel. The whole of the chapter here, he is talking about humility, right? The humility of Christ, how God came in the form of a man, in Jesus Christ, came down to the earth, how he humbly just submitted himself to the Father, and how he is now ruling and reigning as our gracious God and our gracious King. And then Paul kind of starts to coach his church, as it were, here, on what it means to live in light of this truth. Okay, so this is reality here, right? This is reality here, that God came from heaven to earth to save us. And so, how do we live? How do we then live in light of that? Paul in Philippians calls this living a life worthy of the gospel. In other words, how do we live in light of what Jesus Christ has so graciously done for us? In this chapter, he's taught us to do two primary things. Number one, he says, as we look at the humility of Christ, how he didn't just elevate his own status, but he lowered himself so that we might feel elevated as children of God. And he says one of the first marks of a Christian should be what? It should be humility. The first mark should be humility. When we come to grips with that, when we really come to wrestle with that, what that should do is it should just humble us. So number one is humility. The second thing that he says is this. He says that we should be a people who aren't marked by grumbling and complaining. That we should be a people who are not marked by grumbling and complaining. He says that the world grumbles and complains because all the world knows is grumbling and complaining, right? But the thing is, though, we have Jesus. We have Jesus. Therefore, the dominant posture of a Christian heart is not grumbling and complaining, but he said it is gladness and rejoicing. Gladness and rejoicing. So in short, Paul has told us here that Jesus came down and Jesus humbled himself in response to that thought. What we should do is we should be humble, and in response to that, we should be glad. And so this morning, as we're going to be here talking about humility and gladness, we're going to finish out chapter 2 together. And what Paul does here is, I think he does a couple of things here in our 12 verses that we're going to be examining together in our time here. Number one, I think he does this. I think he's putting flesh on these ideas. He's putting flesh on it. He's kind of like been teachy in his tone here, explaining humility and hypothetically what it looks like. And he's been talking about how when we don't grumble and we don't complain, we're like lights in the universe. And we don't do that. But now he's going to introduce us to two very real men who are his companions as he is doing ministry inside of a jail cell. And as I think about these two men right here, I think it kind of serves kind of as a case study for us of this gospel humility and this gospel gladness. And the names of these two men are Timothy and Epaphroditus. Timothy and Epaphroditus. So this morning we have 12 verses that we're going to be looking at. The first 6 verses are about Timothy, and the following 6 are about Epaphroditus. And so what I want to do this morning is take a look at what Paul has to say about these two men, and to draw some observation and applications of each of these men and what it looks like to be humble and what it looks like to be glad. So by way of application, as we always do here, we say, hey, Timothy and Epaphroditus are not the heroes of this text, right? Jesus alone is the hero. But these are two men, though, who have met the hero, and these men, we should just, I think they're worth examining. Right? These men are not the ultimate example, but as men who have met Jesus Christ, who have been transformed by Jesus, and they have a lot of things, practical things that they could show us on what it looks like to meet Jesus and to respond to his gospel. And so this morning we have a very simple outline, okay? Simple outline. Number 1, humble Timothy, and number 2, glad Epaphroditus. Humble Timothy and glad Epaphroditus. Verse 19 to 30. So the first one is this, it's humble Timothy. So let's take a look at this. Verse 19 to 24, it says this, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I too may be cheered by news of you. For I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare, for they all seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. This is a great example of humility, if I can say, right? Paul is saying, hey, there's a lot of guys that are out there in ministry who are doing it for the power, who are doing it for the book deal, who are doing it for their egos, who are doing it for the paycheck, who are doing it for their influence. But not Timothy, though. Not Timothy. Timothy here has 2 questions in ministry, right? And the 2 questions are this. Number 1, what's best for Jesus? We see that in verse 21. And number 2, what's best for God's people? We see that in verse 22 here. That's what needs to be done. That's humility here. Right? Verse 22, this is what it says. But you know Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father he has served with me in the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him just as soon as I see how it will go with me, and I trust in the Lord that shortly I myself will come to also. So here's his introduction to Timothy, right? We got 6 verses here on Timothy. And so I want you to remember this, as we were talking about, Paul is in prison here. He is in prison, writing to this church that he planted, a church that he deeply loves. And in short, he's like, hey, I'm going to send Timothy to you, okay? At some point, I'm going to send him to you, but not yet, though. Because, hey, I need Timothy with me right now. I don't know when I'm going to get out of prison here. I don't know if I'm going to die in prison. I don't know if I want to get out. But Timothy is like a son to me, and I need Timothy. So hands off. Okay, Timothy's mine, all right? He's going to come to you eventually, but he's with me right here. That's Timothy. That's Timothy. Let me give you a little backstory about Timothy here. Timothy, so we can learn something in these 6 verses. Timothy is a guy, as far as we can tell, grew up in a single-parent home. We know that his dad was Greek, and that's about all that we know about him. Right? We know that Timothy has a real close relationship with his mom and his grandmother, and their names are Eunice and Lois. And so, let me ask you here, I wonder if you guys can relate to Timothy. Can you relate to Timothy? How many of you guys grew up in a single-parent home? Maybe some of you grew up in a 2-parent home, but it really kind of felt like a 1-parent home. Maybe you're someone who didn't have a meaningful relationship with your father. Timothy can relate to you. That is Timothy. Timothy's mom and grandma, they were great ladies. Great ladies. They raised him well. They loved him well. These were two Jewish ladies who absolutely loved their Bible, right? Eunice and Lois made sure that Timothy got to VBS, made sure Timothy got to Sunday school. Like, he knew a lot of verses. Timothy really knew his Bible. But Timothy, being Jewish, he did not know Jesus. Did not know Jesus. That is until Paul comes to his hometown of Lystra on his first missionary journey, and there the Apostle Paul preaches the gospel. He does ministry in his hometown, and his mom and his grandmother, they meet Jesus Christ. They place their trust in Jesus Christ, and now Timothy is now being raised in a Christian home. Timothy, too, becomes a Christian. He starts to grow and to flourish in his faith. Paul leaves town, comes back, and a couple of years later, the two of them meet, and they become fast friends, right? That's Paul, and that's Timothy. In this time, Paul essentially says this. Paul is like, look, Timothy, I don't have a son. How about I be like a father to you? I will teach you some things, and I will be there for you, Timothy. And Timothy especially, he essentially just says, basically, Paul, hey, I don't really have a dad, and I would love to learn from you, Paul. I would love to be mentored by you. And what happens is in verse 22 says that Timothy becomes like a son to Paul. And these two, they serve side by side with each other. They go on to write books of the Bible together. They go on to mission trips together. They go and they plant churches. They have this father and son relationship going, and it's beautiful to see. And what I want to point out here is that one of the marks of true humility is reaching out for mentoring relationships with people that are older in faith than we are and that are wiser than we are. And that is Timothy. Timothy is a new Christian. He knows that he has some gaps, right? He knows that he has some blind spots in his life. He has some weaknesses, but he wanted to be a man of God. He wanted to be used by God mightily, and so he gets himself around a godly dude around him, and he says, hey, let me learn from you. I want to learn from you. I think I can grow to be more like Jesus Christ in the company of godly men who are older than me. And so he's like, hey, Paul, can you help me? Can you help me? And so understand, church, this. I want to take a moment and I want to talk to just, the younger ladies and fellas that are in this room. Both those of you that are young physically, but not only that, but those of you that are new Christians as well, that are in the room here, that are listening. So you are younger spiritually as well. And let me say this. The local church is one of God's great gifts to us. It's a great gift to us. But the thing is this, though. The church is not a building. The church is not primarily a program, bunch of programs, but it's the people, right? It's people. And even in this room are people that have been walking with Jesus for a very long time, older than you, and there are some that are here that are newer to the faith. And so, to the newer folks, if we could just be honest with ourselves and say, maybe, you know what, you don't know the Bible that well, and you're wondering, honestly, is this going to get easier at some point? Some of you are, trying to navigate, how do I be a Christian in my particular career field? How do I be a Christian in my workplace? And some of you young ladies who have young kids who are here and you want to do it right, but if you're honest with yourself, you're barely keeping your head above water. And some of you are in this room and you feel absolutely overwhelmed. But here's my challenge to the young folks that are here in this room. Would you get around mature believers? Would you get around mature believers? Would you get to know them? Would you build a friendship with them? Would you learn from them? Let me give you a couple of practical tips, because maybe you're sitting over here and you're like, well, you know what, Finn, that's great. That sounds great, but yeah, like how do I actually do that? Like we don't have a www.getmentored@hope.com here. We just don't have that here. So let me give you a couple of tips, okay? Number one, join a life group. Join a small group with older people. They would love to have you, okay? And you would be surprised with like what you would learn just being in the room with older people. And I think, you know, there's just kind of this mentor myth out there that says everyone else has someone that has a one-on-one relationship that is invested with them. And the thing is, like, that's not true. That's not true. Very few people actually have the benefit of that, right? But you would be surprised how much you could learn and by listening to older saints and that are talking about God, that are sharing what they are learning in the Bible. And that right there will go an incredibly long way. So number one, get in the room, right? Get in the room with some older folks, right? Join a life group. Join a small group. Number two, to the younger people that are here, I want to say, be the initiator to the Pauls that are in your life. Be the initiator. Here's the lies that the older Christians are believing. Okay, so I want all the older Christians that are in the room, I want you to tune me out if you haven't already. Just tune me out right now, and I don't know, re-Velcro your shoes or whatever you do, whatever older people do. Just do that right now, because I want to speak specifically to the younger people that are here. Okay, so because I want to tell them what you guys actually believe. Okay, so to the younger people that are here, the older people that are in this church, that are here in this room, they believe two things. Number one, that you don't want their help. And number two, they think that they don't have much to offer. Right? They don't have much to offer. And those are lies from the enemy. Absolute lies. Like, you want their help, right? And there's a tremendous amount that they can share with you and help you as well. And so my challenge to you, younger people, is be the initiator, right? Be the initiator. Go to a life group. Go to a small group. Meet someone who has been a Christian longer than you. Invite them to lunch. Maybe you can invite them to breakfast. Pay for their breakfast. Just get to intentionally know them, right? Be intentionally around the Pauls in your life. Now, all the older people in the room, I want to talk to you for a moment. So the younger people in the room, I don't know, do what you do. You can go on Twitter or IG at this moment right now. You can just tune me out. Okay, but I want to talk to the older people right now. So younger people, cover your ears. Okay, older people, I want to just talk to you for a second here. There are some newer Christians that are in this room right now. And many of them have had just people that have loved them and cared for them. But there are some in this church that have not had that. Like, they have not had moms and dads that have prayed for them and loved them and had the best for them. And so they would absolutely kill to have a loving, invested, older Christian. Someone who would mentor them, someone who would pray for them, someone who would care for them. And that would go such a long way. Like, if they're my age, they were probably discipled in the MTV generation, right? We were all discipled by MTV in the 1990s. And those of us that grew up in it, we have no clue, right? They don't know how to walk with Jesus. They want to know how to have a godly marriage, how to raise kids, right? And they make it up as they go, and they would just love your help. And if you are here and you're younger than me, then you know what? You were probably discipled by social media and just really bad movies. And so you have no idea. Younger people, don't listen to me, but cover your ears. I want to say to the older people, they're faking it. They are faking it. They are just confused about just, sex and relationships. And a lot of parents are just overwhelmed by just the parenting and all those things, right? So would you be an example for them? Now, I know that, you don't think like they want it. I know that, you don't think that you have much to offer here in this church. But I want to say that is a lie from the depths of hell. That is a lie from the enemy. Let me say this. If you are here and you have held down the same job for 10 years, if you have been faithful to the same spouse for 10 years or more, if you have any pattern of reading your Bible for 10 years, the last 10 years, let me say, you are a spiritual giant in this generation. Like, that is unheard of. You don't hear about this stuff. Think about it. You are a giant. That doesn't happen anymore. We need you to be a Paul to the Timothys in this church. And additionally, some of you might say, well, Finn, I'm sorry, but that's not my story, though. Right? I have not been faithful. I have messed up many times in my life. I don't have a great story to say. And so I don't know if I could be a mentor to other people. I've really blown it. And, you don't know my story. It's really darker than what you think it is. Let me just remind you here today about the Apostle Paul, okay? Because before he was mentoring young pastors, he was killing young deacons. Okay, he is responsible for the first Christian martyr. His name is Stephen. Okay, so he's stoning to death Christian leaders, and now he is the one who is investing in the next generation of leaders. And so, I don't know if you're here and you killed somebody before. If you have, don't tell me, because I would have to tell authorities on you, but I don't know your story, okay? I don't know your story. But listen, if like Paul, you have met Jesus and he has written a new story, your weaknesses, your sins, your shortcomings could be the most valuable thing that could be shared with the next generation. Right? How have you experienced God's grace? How have you experienced the gospel? Where has Jesus shown you forgiveness and done a new work in your weakness? I want to say, don't underestimate the impact that you here can have on a young person's life. Right? It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. Let me show you some other pointers as well. Because, word of advice, don't just go to the next person in skinny jeans and say, hey, can I mentor you? Like, no, that would not go well. Okay, that would be weird. Okay, so it has to be a little bit more natural than that. Okay, so here's what I would say you would do. Join a life group. Join a small group. Right? Join it. Listen, church, we have two rhythms here that we have, right? We gather on Sundays, and then we scatter throughout the week as a church in life groups and small groups doing life together. So join a group where there's younger people. Not a young singles group, because that would be kind of weird as well, but a multi-generational group, okay? Join a life group. Join a small group. And find a way to just eat with friends and just new Christians and simply share your story with them. And maybe you could be an icebreaker for them, right? Like, even if your testimony is the same, your testimony is like decades old, you can just share with them your story. Tell them your story. And ask a young person, what's your story? How did you meet Jesus? Do you even know Jesus? I would, what is Jesus doing in your life right now? And then, just just have breakfast with them once a month, right? Once every other week or so. Let's get together. Let's talk about what Jesus is doing in our life, right? Could we do that? I want to share a story of my own life, and then we're going to move on to Epaphroditus. Tom, who's our accountant here, when he and I were younger, when we were teenagers, we had a mentor in our old church, and his name was Thomas. And Thomas was serving the church in various ways, and we connected through the church. And so he was serving as like a mentor to us. And Thomas, he would meet with us that year, and, we really didn't do anything special. Like, all we did, he just kind of invited us over, and we just prayed together. We just talked about God. And we would just, just get together and do that weekly. Sometimes it was just every monthly. And then he would just encourage me to keep a little journal. And he would say, just write down what God is doing in your life right now. And then we would just read the Bible together. We would just talk about God. And we just formed a friendship that year. And it was beautiful. It was wonderful to see. And here I am, like 23 years later. Here I am, right? If you were here and if you ask me, who are the 5 people that had the most influence in my life, there is no doubt Thomas would be in the top 5, right? And the thing about Thomas is that he was a pretty ordinary guy. Like, when I say ordinary, I mean he wasn't rich. He was not a theologian. He was not a pastor. He was, he wasn't a rocket scientist, right? He was just regular old Thomas, like regular guy, regular Thomas. But the reach of his ministry in my life, in Tom's life, and in just so dozens of people were just extraordinary, right? Because what did he do? He reached out to me. He bought me lunch, bought me breakfast, prayed with me, encouraged me, right? And he just stuck with me when I was giving up on myself. He just stuck with me in that season of my life. And that's all it takes. That's it. That's all it takes. So let me ask you today, who needs you to be a Paul to a Timothy in their life? And who of you, like a Timothy, need to humbly move toward a Paul in your life and say, hey, I would love to learn from you? Church, that's what this thing is. Church is not primarily a program, not a building, not an institution. It is family. And you are sitting here with people, and God is the Father, and we are brothers and sisters, and fathers and mothers and daughters and sons to love and to encourage each other and to walk with each other to grow in Jesus. That is humble Timothy. That is humble Timothy. Look with me at the next guy we're going to be looking at is Epaphroditus. Number 2, Epaphroditus. Verse 25, it says this. Paul says, I have thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, and fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger and minister to my need. For he has been longing for you all and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. Indeed, he was ill, near to death. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. I am the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. So receive him in the Lord with all joy, and honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. Okay, so a little bit about the backstory about this guy Epaphroditus here. We don't know too much about Epaphroditus. We assume that he probably became a Christian through the Philippian church, the church that Paul had planted many years back. Epaphroditus wasn't a pastor. He wasn't in vocational ministry that we know of. He was just an ordinary guy who just loved God and just served faithfully the local church. And now what happens is word gets back to the Philippian church that their founding pastor, Paul, is in jail, likely in Rome, some 800 miles away from Philippi. And so the church, what do? They gather generous offerings for Paul. And they write notes of encouragement. They get this little care package going to give Paul in prison. And so, those days, you don't have FedEx or UPS, it's 61 AD. And so what do? They need a volunteer. And they're looking for a volunteer, someone who's going to take this care package to Pastor Paul, who is in prison. And guess what? Epaphroditus is the guy. Epaphroditus, a regular volunteer in the church, takes a leave of absence from work, maybe burned up some vacation days, and he says, you know what, I got good feet, I probably got a horse, so I'm just going to get there, I'm going to head off to Rome. And along the way, in verse 27, you know what it says? It says he becomes ill. So ill that he almost died on his way to deliver the care package to the Apostle Paul. But Epaphroditus is a tough dude, though. He's a tough guy, and he sticks it out. He heals up, and he doesn't turn back, and he does exactly what he says that he is going to do. He delivers the package to Paul. And now he has been ministering to Paul. He is caring for Paul's needs. He is encouraging Paul as he awaits his sentence in prison. And then in verse 28, it says that Paul is going to now send Epaphroditus back to them, which he later does, carrying Paul's letter, which we call the letter of Philippians today in the Bible. Epaphroditus is the messenger that took this back to the church. Now, I have been thinking a lot about Epaphroditus this week in preparation for this sermon. Because to be honest with you, I really haven't studied Epaphroditus before. Maybe more than 10 seconds. That's it. I was reading it over. For me, I'm usually drawn to the outspoken people in the Bible. So I like to study about Peter, Elijah, Moses, and even the Apostle Paul, right? Like the church planter, the pastor, the preacher, right? That's the guy I want to be like. And God this week told me to slow down and look at Epaphroditus, right? Get to know this guy a little bit here. The thing about Epaphroditus is this. Epaphroditus, he didn't preach many sermons that we know of. He didn't plant a church. He didn't write a book. He didn't start a school. He didn't work miracles that we know of. He didn't lead lots of people, right? He wasn't this standout character in the Bible. But here's what we do know about Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus said that he would deliver this care package to Paul, and that he said that he would take the letter back from him, and it came at a great cost. But he was faithful. He was faithful to do what he said he would do. And it was difficult, but he doesn't grumble. He doesn't complain. He does it with gladness. And after looking at this man Epaphroditus this week, I think this week, he has become now one of my favorite characters in the entire Bible. One of my favorite characters right now. Because you know why? Because it just dawned on me that Jesus Christ built the local church on the backs of people like Epaphroditus. On the backs of people like him. Not a superstar. He doesn't get a lot of attention in the Bible. He doesn't have a glamorous job in the church. He was faithful in the little things. This man was a selfless, faithful, humble, hardworking man. Right? He's just a regular dude who loves Jesus, and he loves the local church, and he is faithful. I mean, think about it for a moment here. You know, if Epaphroditus was not faithful in the small things, then we would be missing a book in the Bible. And for 2,000 years, God has been just bringing life to people, right, who read this book, all because Epaphroditus was faithful, and he did what he said that he would do. And I thought about Epaphroditus this week, and I felt like, God was telling me this. I felt like God was telling me, Finn, don't be awesome. Just be faithful. Right? Don't be awesome. Just be faithful. And I wonder if that's a word for us this morning. Right? Don't be awesome. Just be faithful. I think as preachers, right, like we get excited, like personally I do. I read this book and I get excited reading the book of Acts, like this world-changing movement. I get so excited about the work of the gospel in and through the people. And, I want to get up here, I want to preach. Man, Jesus wants to just change the world in and through you. Jesus wants to do so many things through you. Yes, that's what I want to do. Like Jesus worked in you to save you, and now Jesus wants to work through you to change the world that is around you for him. And I know that's true. I know that's true. But I think we oftentimes overlook the how. Right? We overlook how. Right? How is it that Jesus wants to work through you? How is it that Jesus wants to change the world through you? You see, most often it's not the extraordinary, right? But it's in the ordinary. It's not in the miraculous, it's in the mundane. It's not in the spectacular, it's in the small, selfless service of humble and faithful people who walk with Jesus. It's in the small things. Right? It's being a good friend. It's working an honest job with integrity. It's reading to and praying to your children. It's serving the local church. I think awesome is overrated, and I think faithful is undervalued. I think awesome is overrated, and I think faithful is undervalued. So church, would we do this? Would we be a church that absolutely shoots for faithful, ordinary, faithful people who love Jesus, who humbly serve his church, and we work hard with a glad heart? That is Epaphroditus. Verse 29, Paul says this about Epaphroditus. I love this. It says, honor such men. Honor them. Right? These men are incredible. The faithful, dear, hardworking saints of the church. He says, honor such men. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to say this. To those of you that are here, who serve here, to those of you that faithfully disciple your children, to those of you that faithfully tithe on a modest salary, to those of you that come early Sunday mornings for worship practice, to run slides, to run sound, to those of you that stay back and clean up and throw the garbage out and sweep up after all of this, right? To those of you who humbly serve in children's ministry here so selflessly, to those of you who open up your homes, you bleach out your bathroom before people come over, right? And you share food with these people. To those of you who read your Bible every day, listening to Jesus. To those of you who are caring for an elderly person that no one else knows about, but you have been such a faithful friend. To all of you, I want to say, good work. and we honor you. We honor you. You may never have a book written about your life, but I want you to know Jesus sees you. Jesus sees you. He saw Epaphroditus, and I want you to know that you are making a bigger difference than you could ever realize. Church, would we be a congregation, have a reputation of ordinary, faithful people who love Jesus and who loves his local church? I'm going to wrap it up saying this. I'm going to say this, that the humility of Timothy and the glad faithfulness of Epaphroditus is but a reflection of what they saw in their Savior, Jesus Christ. Right? As I got started saying earlier on, I said these two men are not the heroes of our text, but they knew the one who was the hero, and that is Jesus Christ. And it was Jesus Christ who humbled himself to take their sins and ours on the cross. And it was Jesus who was faithful in the small things, who was tempted in the wilderness for 40 days, who walked through 30 years of the human experience like you and I. He was faithful to honor his Father in every way that he might earn a righteousness before him that you and I, we could never earn. It was Jesus who, for gladness and faithful obedience, did for us what we could never do for ourselves in his perfect life, in his sacrificial death. And now, church, as we treasure the gospel and as we trust in Jesus, would we be a church that is filled with spiritual fathers and mothers, spiritual sons and daughters who are just faithfully walking with each other, encouraging each other, praying for each other? And would we be a group of ordinary people who are made glad in our faithfulness in Jesus?